This Leading Differently mini-series is kindly sponsored by Pact Solutions. University leaders know that complexity slows progress. Pact helps universities deliver digital transformation that endures and improves the day-to-day experience for students and staff. The team focuses on the student journey and the core systems that matter to simplify processes, standardise integrations, and unlock trusted data for reporting and decision-making. Their approach is adopt, not adapt, change with people, not to them, and governance that moves at the right pace without unnecessary bureaucracy. From strategy to hands-on delivery, they reduce risk, accelerate outcomes, and build lasting capability inside the institution. Pact has supported many universities, including Birmingham City University, Buckinghamshire New University, University of London, Southampton Solent University, and the Royal College of Art. Learn more at pact-solutions.co.uk and connect with the team to explore how Pact can help your next transformation be a success. I am Susanna Marsden, a higher education consultant who helps to develop and support HE institutions in the UK and beyond. This podcast takes a deep dive into the roles of people who work in this hugely varied higher education sector. Each episode reveals what's involved in a specific role, the career path that led to it, and tips on how to get in and get on in these jobs. My guest in this episode is Aaron Tyler, co-founder and director of Pact Solutions. In our conversation, Aaron reflects upon some of the themes within the earlier episodes I recorded with 4 different Vice-Chancellors, including how those topics inform practice at Pact Solutions. We also consider the institutional leadership qualities he looks for when working with an institution, and later on in the episode, we look to the future in relation to the role of the student record system, the potential of AI, and models of shared services. Aaron, welcome to Job Shadowing HE, and thank you for being the final guest of this Leading Differently mini-series. We'll talk a bit more about some of the themes coming out of earlier episodes in a few moments, but first, let's focus a bit on you and your organisation. You're co-founder and director of Pact Solutions, which focuses on supporting digital transformation within higher education. Can you share some more about what that means in practice?
Sure. Thank you for having me, Susanna, and thank you for letting us sponsor the series. It's been really interesting hearing from each of the 4 Vice-Chancellors. Like you said, when you were presenting the series to us, it'd be interesting to find out how different institutions are doing things, how different leaders are doing things. And I've taken lots personally from each of them, so I hope everyone else has as well. But to answer your question, I'm a co-founder director at Pact Solutions, and we are a management consultancy that focuses on digital transformation. Really, we work anywhere behind the teaching and learning scene. So there's lots of great activity that happens on the student-facing side at universities and with partners that support them. But below the sort of watermark on the iceberg is how we tend to think about it. There's a lot of activity that happens in the back office. And we look to help universities realise their potential anywhere along that student journey, from applicant all the way through to alumni. And we tend to sit at sort of the triumphant of digital people and process. So we talk about being digital transformation, but you can't do that without the people in the process. The technology is one thing, but if the processes that use them and the people that are using them also aren't aligned, then the real potential for universities isn't realised. So that's our role, and obviously as a co-founder director, I have a leading role within that consultancy.
And you set up Pact in 2022, and that followed a career to that point outside higher education. What was it that drew you in to working with the sector, and what's keeping you?
Well, to be perfectly honest, I was working with multiple clients in industries at that time, and this was another opportunity to run another large transformation program. So I was given the opportunity to go and join Solent University, Southampton Solent as they are now, to lead on implementing Tribal SITS, their student management system. So I didn't really see it as a move into HE specifically with an intention, to be honest. But what I have found since is definitely keeping me, and that's really it's 2 things, and they're both people related. One is the students. I've worked at lots of different sectors, but mainly in financial services before higher education. And I worked for a large building society in a provincial town where the head office was in a provincial town. And I'd go there every single day, be working on a variety of projects, some big, some small, but never ever once did I see the impact face to face with what I was doing on any of my projects to the customers. But of course, you go into a university and you're rubbing shoulders with your customers, with your students all day, every day. And knowing that you're having that impact immediately and that immediate feedback is incredibly rewarding. It's something I haven't experienced anywhere else. And the other people element is the people working in it. What I found and what struck me most was that people working in HE, in my experience, are there for more than just the paycheck, most of them. We know that the sector it doesn't pay as competitively as maybe some private sector industries. And so there's I believe, a real purpose behind why most people stay in higher education. Maybe slightly ironically, I didn't get a degree. So I did well enough in my A-levels, but didn't go to university. I did attempt later in life to go as a mature student, but it was difficult to manage with a young family. And so now, but education was always important to me. I just didn't want to carry on learning in that formal way. So to be involved in that on a day-to-day basis it's just really fulfilling, and working with the people, as I say.
The higher education sector is quite distinct in the way in which it works behind the scenes, and some people would comment that it's particularly complex. But as Claire Marchant, VC at the University of Gloucestershire, mentioned in the first episode of the mini-series, universities are ultimately businesses and need to be commercially astute. Having come into working from HE from other sectors that you just talked about there, what are your observations about the similarities and differences of how you see the sector operating in comparison with elsewhere?
I remember Claire saying it now, saying that they are complex organisations. And I think that the similarities are that they're big organisations serving multiple customers and their students. The organisations that I've worked in various sizes, obviously the consultancy that I'm leading now, we're minute in comparison to most universities. But I've worked, as I mentioned already, at large financial services firms, insurance firms, building societies. And in that respect, the sort of behind the scenes operational structures can be quite similar. You've got different divisions. You've got finance, you've got HR, you've got IT, and that exists in both universities as much as it does in the private sector. I think the big difference is the maturity of those shared services. So if you look at the customer facing services, say of a building society, for example, we're now interacting with them pretty much digitally. And we know that the sort of education landscape is moving to a more digital leaning phase as well. There's still that huge face-to-face element for universities, though, and that's starting to become rarer and rarer in most industries. If you're not in hospitality and you're not in retail, you're pretty much dealing with your customer in a digital way. The change that needs to happen behind the scenes to enable that type of move to more digital learning for universities isn't as, I guess, robust or streamlined as most commercial entities. The pressures to change up until the last 5 years or so have been less on universities. They've been largely teaching much the same way, delivering their capabilities, their services in much the same way for the last many decades. Whereas commercial businesses, because they're always competing for a confined market, have always had to adapt. And those that haven't adapted, we've seen close. Universities haven't been under those kinds of pressures before, but they are growing. The need to balance your books are growing. Cash flow is getting much tighter. And so the efficiency in the back-end systems or the back-end processes of delivering change and adapting needs to get better. It needs to get closer to how really good commercial companies are now. It's something that I think that we can help with, we being Pact Solutions, but also other companies like us. I think that bringing in expertise from that commercial sector can help universities understand what good looks like. Lots of people, as we discussed at the start, are in it for purposes beyond just that paycheck. And so sometimes you'll find people that have always worked in higher education, always worked at universities or colleges, and so they've not seen the other side of the commercial fence where how things are done. And so through no fault of their own, they don't know that things can be different and could be done in more efficient and more effective ways.
Although we can talk about the sector overall, there is significant diversity within it. And the Leading Differently mini-series was purposely designed to show university leadership in 4 quite different institutions, all of which are succeeding in their goals, albeit in a quite challenging financial and global market. As someone working closely with the HE sector, what were the key points that stood out to you from what you heard across those episodes?
The biggest common theme that stood out for me was that all 4 of them were really clear on their vision for their institution. They understood why their institution exists, why it should continue to exist in its environment, the impact it can have on its environment, and how they're going to reinforce that and grow that over time. Obviously, I know a bit more about the work that Professor Damon Page is doing at Buckinghamshire New University as we're working there and supporting them at the moment. And Damien is all about rapid change, and his purpose, or the institution's purpose there, is to serve and enhance participation across a multitude of backgrounds, particularly individuals from maybe more disadvantaged backgrounds that require an institution that understands their unique challenges, understands that their aspirations are still there, that despite potentially coming from a background where the opportunities weren't as great as some other backgrounds, the people that come from those backgrounds are no less ambitious as anyone else. And it's a really strong identity for the university to follow, and a vision that I know the people that work there are getting behind. And likewise, David Ember, who talks about Birmingham City University being rooted in Birmingham, is also very strong. They want to be known as Birmingham's University, and he's very clear on that being the vision for the institution, and he wants the university to unite behind that theme of diversity and making sure there's opportunity for everyone. In different ways, Evelyn Welch at the University of Bristol, she just coined the phrase not the University of Bristol, but the University for Bristol, and very much anchoring again to that sense of place and that sense of purpose within the community. So I've lived in Bristol for over half my life, and briefly worked for the university as a coach to their women's football team. So I was very intrigued listening to Evelyn about the direction for the university. And the theme is much the same. It's about that identity, about who we are, why we're here, what we're doing, who we're serving, and how we do that best. So I think that the commonality is what struck me most, is that really good leaders, I think, have really clear visions, and they're able to articulate them, and they're able to get people to work behind them, to deliver on those visions. And I think the main role of a leader, certainly on that scale, we've got such big organisations, is to make sure that the North Star is well and truly understood. It's always in everyone's vision, and they can help steer the university towards that. On a much smaller scale, obviously at Pact, we're a young company, we're growing, but we've got a quarterly offsite day tomorrow, and we'll be talking about our ambitions and our vision. And I think listening to the 4 podcasts recently has hammered home that I think that's a leadership trait that you can have at any scale of organisation, and that's what stood out for me most, I think.
Going back to that focus that Pact has in working with the sector on digital transformation, and you just talked there about those leadership qualities, what do you look for from institutional leadership when you're looking at a potential project with a university and wanting to make sure it's a success?
The main thing that we look for is a clarity of thought, clarity of decision and intention. And actually, that's part of the reason why we are engaged by some universities, is because things aren't clear at the moment. When you've got 1,000,001 different things going on in your organisation, many of them, if not all of them, having some element of digital interaction, digital capability. Obviously, all of these things point back to a CIO, CDIO, for example, who then has to balance a multitude of priorities within their organisation, and everyone demanding more, better, faster, yesterday, rather than in a nice future timescale. And so sometimes we'll get engaged because a university is really clear. They've understood where they're going with their overall strategy, and then the CIO will have worked on their digital strategy and know, right, so digitally, this is how we're going to enable our overarching strategy. To do that, this is the roadmap of improvements that we're going to make: systems, architecture, security, data, etc. and now we've got a piece of work that we need specific support on. Brilliant. We can go in, we can help and identify where we can support there. Other times, some institutions will come to us and say, we need to replace XYZ system. Can you help? And our first question is always, why do you need to replace it? And we might get answers like end of life, it's really old, it doesn't work. And we're like, okay, end of life we can understand, but which system you go for won't be defined by the fact that the old one is going end of life. The fact it's really old, yes, okay, we know that we should refresh technology often because technology changes frequently. But again, that doesn't really tell you why we should. And it doesn't work leads to lots of questions about what doesn't work. Are you sure that's what you need it to do, etc. And so we always go back to, okay, before we worry about system change, what's your digital strategy? Where are you going? Why are you going there? And how are you going to get there overall? How does this particular piece of work fit into that strategy? And yeah, just really understand how they've got there. And sometimes we've worked with universities and they've gone at the end of a consulting period, we don't need to change that system. In fact, we don't need to change any systems. We need to work out what our processes are first. Or actually, all of our systems are fine if they only spoke to each other in the right way, and we need to work on how our integrations work. And so the first step that we take is always to define a problem. And a problem is only properly defined if you can say what the definition of done is. How do you know that problem is no longer a problem? At what point can we tick it and go, problem solved? And if we don't know what the problem is, then we definitely don't need to be looking at a solution. But if we know what the problem is, or multiple problems, then we can start working out what the solutions are. And we don't always just come in and do that sort of consulting piece and hand over some slideware and walk away. Then we'll usually work with a partner on doing the do, on the heavy lifting, on delivering change with project or program managers, analysts to help fully understand what the problem is, and then technical people who might be doing sort of integration developments or system configurations, etc., right through to working with our partners on testing and close down and hand over so that it can be run by the organisation into the future. What we would like to see is a really clearly thought out strategy. But if there isn't, then we can also help there as well.
And institutions will have those strategies at the start, and then you move into the project. Can you give us some insight into some of the challenges you might see when you're working through a transformation process with an institution?
The biggest challenge is always, I'll call it complexity, but I don't like saying complexity because everything is complex these days. If it wasn't complex, you wouldn't need a third party like ourselves. It wouldn't be something that would be a big change program. I think what I mean is it's just not understanding what you already have. So lots of institutions who have grown rapidly over time, or their digital capabilities have grown rapidly over time, and they've gone and made decisions, in sort of individual decisions about system purchases, system upgrades, alignment of teams to various processes. There is rarely a really good understanding of the overall picture, architecturally or operationally, on how things are done. And that's what I mean by complex. When you don't understand where you're going from, it's really difficult to understand what you need to do to go where you want to go. So sometimes you have to take 2 steps back to have a look at where you are to go forwards. The pressure or the challenge with looking at the as is, as it's known in project speak, is it can be deemed to be expensive. We're going to spend all this time writing about what we already do. Like, how does that get me to move forwards? How does that move the dial? And so there's a challenge from people to go, well, we don't need to know what we're doing now. We need to know where we're going. And to some extent, that's right. But you need to know enough about how you're operating now to know where you're going. Otherwise, what you'll find is that you might be able to do the technical change without understanding too much about what you've got now, because you could almost just go completely greenfield and build something from scratch. But if you want to bring the people on the journey, you want them to understand why their role's changing, or what they do within their jobs, or even potentially that their job is no longer required and they need to potentially apply for a different job. That's difficult if you can't understand where they're coming from. And people are going to be very resistant to change if you don't go in and understand what they do on a day-to-day basis, recognise what value that's bringing to the institution, and then help them along that journey of change towards their new role or their new way of doing things within a new capability or new function. You're going to lose everyone. We talk about being a digital transformation consultancy, and we are, but for us, you can't do that without the people change as well. We need to bring them on that journey.
And Pact has worked with a number of universities of different shapes and sizes. To what extent do your experiences of working with one institution then inform working with another, or are projects always distinct?
I think our experience always helps. The more universities, the more colleges, the more institutions we can work with, the more experience we'll have. I mean, we've already discussed about my background. I've only been in HE for just under 4 years. My co-founder, Pete Colley, though, has been in HE his whole career. I always tell him how lucky he is he's been in HE and he hasn't had to go and work for an insurance firm. But he hasn't had the joy of experiencing that yet. Hopefully never, I suppose I should say. But the rest of the team is very, very HE experienced. We do have quite a big subcontract team as well as our permanent consultants who tend to bring more of their skills from outside the sector. But a lot of our permanent team have been in the sector for sort of 10, 15, 20 plus years, some of them, and really bringing that knowledge. That sector knowledge always helps because it's likely that the team have lived the challenge already. If we go speak to someone in registry about the challenge they're having with getting the correct assessment data together to provide that out for the right award, it's our team have experienced that. Having said that, it isn't just a rinse and repeat every time we turn up at a new institution, but we have to understand the differences between institutions. A Russell Group university has got multiple colleges. Lots of those colleges work independently from each other compared to potentially a post-92 university, which is much smaller, which has got more centralised teams. To take the same approach with both of those institutions would be madness. Neither will be successful. So we've got to take all of the experience we've got from the multiple institutions between us that we've worked for, the ones that we've worked for since being an organisation as Pact, and then understand the uniqueness of the next institution that we're working with.
You talked earlier about the work that you're doing at Buckinghamshire New University under the leadership of Professor Damien Page. And in the episode with him, he and I talked about the implementation of the new student record system and why it was important to be pursuing that now. How do you see the future of student record systems going into the future? And as a sector, are we spending enough time thinking about its potential?
I think as a sector, I'd be surprised if there isn't an institution that's not thinking about the current student record system. I can't think of anyone that I've spoken to where they've gone, no, that's all fine. The student record system is such a foundational system at every university, it can't not be considered because you want to change almost any other system. At some point, it's probably going to be talking to your student record system, your VLE, your finance system, your HR system, your timetabling system. Everything at one point or another will be talking to your student record system. And so it's like open heart surgery. You can't change the heart of a university's digital capabilities and not for it to be impacting something else. Where we are at the moment, from my experience with the sector, is that there's been some. I can say there's been some changes. There's obviously a lot of people listening to this will be aware of changes within vendors, new entrants to the market, existing vendors changing their products, changing their licensing structures for those systems. And some of those are taking time to get used to. Traditionally, once you've replaced a student record system, you don't want to do that every 5 minutes because it's painful. And actually, most of them are good for a good period of time. I think what's happening now, though, is that digital expectations from our students are changing so quickly that sometimes our student record systems aren't able to keep up. And I know that the vendors are making changes that means that you will be able to keep up, but that means significant change for the universities. Why is it so complex other than the fact it touches everything? It's probably because in reality it's not one system. It's probably 5 or 6 systems all in one. You could easily say that admissions is one system all by itself. Enrollment could be another system. The assessment and progression, the algorithms that are used to make awards, it could be another system. You've got graduation at the end. You've obviously got all your financial registration, your financial management. That's only going to get harder with the introduction of LLE, the lifelong entitlement to funding. Then you've got what we would refer to as supporting systems. So a placement management system, a case management system, your CRM to some extent. Some institutions expect a student record system to be all things to all people. We were in a board yesterday where the management of placements was brought up. Will the new system include placement management? And we're saying that there are options out there that will add some capability for placement management, but they won't be best of breed. If you're looking to your student record system to do multiple things, you're likely to get a slightly substandard product. When I say substandard, it depends upon your requirements. And then that's what you need to really understand. How many placements do you do within your university? How intensive is that upon the administration teams that you have? How in-depth or how capable do you need a placement system to be? And if you need it to be really strong, if it's a core part of your offering, then go out and get best of breed. If it's something that a small number of students do, then maybe you could achieve that through these sort of additional modules that some of the student record systems have. But you need to be really careful when you're making these decisions that you're getting what you need and what you expect. And I think that the future potentially will go back to people looking at student record system change, not just as the one system, but as a bit more of a enterprise change. So if we're going to start with this, as I said, heart surgery and replace the main system, that needs to be done knowing what's going to happen to all of those satellite systems, knowing where they are on the roadmap for change over the next 5 years, 10 years, whatever it may be, so that the decisions you make today are future-proofed. In terms of the potential, because it's an administrative system, you would expect the introduction of artificial agents that can come in and do some of the jobs. You would expect greater insights potentially, because you'll be able to start looking at data across the system, look at behaviours amongst students. How can we use analytical data to help us retain more students? When can we spot that they need support? How often is a submission late? How often, again, I'm going to talk about attendance monitoring. This probably should be a separate system, but you might then capture that attendance monitoring information within your student record. You add that into the fact that a submission is late, and suddenly you're starting to see a pattern of behaviour amongst your students that will hopefully give you indications or opportunities for early intervention so that you can help support more students through their journey. I think if we can get there, that's a huge potential. It's the potential where we're less worried about the administration of the record, because that just happens really well. And we're more interested in supporting students and improving the experience for students across the board. I think that's part of the reason I think why we exist. If we could help universities realise that potential, then we've served our purpose.
You mentioned AI there, and I'm interested to get your views on AI a bit more generally. We heard from Evelyn Welch, Vice-Chancellor at the University of Bristol, about its hosting of the UK's biggest supercomputer, designed to significantly advance the UK's AI strategy. How do you think we're going to see AI progress within higher education in relation to student record systems or behind-the-scenes systems and processes more generally?
Well, I think it's actually Europe's biggest supercomputer, I think. So it's a hell of a system. In terms of the potential, obviously it's huge. We know it's going to impact lots of industries. As I was just mentioning, I think the first one will be administrative tasks, with agents able to repeat processes, agents able to answer many frequently asked questions. It's important we don't lose the human touch, though, because if I've got an extenuating circumstance, for example, that means I should be getting more time on exams, that's really, really personal to me. It'll be really personal to the student that has that extenuating circumstance. You don't want to be treated like a number. So whilst an agent, a chatbot might be able to give me information quickly, I might want to explore that a bit more, and eventually I'd want to be able to speak to a human. So I think there's always got to be that balance. But I think I've got a slightly cautionary tale for universities and colleges, is that before you start looking at AI, that you've got to make sure that your foundational data capabilities are in place. So we do lots of data assessments for institutions, and we typically use something called DMBOK, which is the Data Management Book of Knowledge. It's a tried and tested framework for managing data. It's as good for institutions as it is for retail, as it is for hospitality. Any industry, it's just a way to manage data within any organisation. AI and learning analytics, etc., that real sort of key output of data is at the top of the pyramid. But to get to the top of that pyramid, you've got to make sure that your data underneath is correct. you've got to understand your metadata, your master data. Do you have data dictionaries in place? Do all of your systems talk to each other in a common way using things like canonical models? Is a student known as by the same paradigms in one system as it is in another? Because if you throw in an AI agent into an unstructured environment that isn't secure, that hasn't got those reference data models and everything else fully understood, you're going to get some weird and wonderful answers to your questions. And if you're making big decisions on those weird and wonderful answers, all I'd say is good luck. It's going to be some exciting times. So the potential of AI is huge, and it's brilliant that as a sector we can try and lead on that. But there's a lot of work to be done to make sure that the data is in a good place.
One of the topics that I talked about with all the Vice-Chancellors was their reflections on partnership and collaborations between institutions, and each of them had their own views and strategic approaches on that. What are your observations about the potential for greater collaboration across the sector in relation to digital transformation, or are there just too many barriers?
So I think the summary of that is shared services. It's been talked about all the time, and I think it's inevitable that at some point we're going to see more shared services. There already are examples of it. Obviously, we've got UCAS, we've got networks of JISC, etc., EduRoam. There are already shared examples of shared services. Being the fact that we spend a lot of our time and effort on student record systems, we've been asked, is that something that we see can happen? And actually, there's a really interesting use case in Sweden. In Sweden, there are 41 institutions that use the same student record system. And I don't mean they use the same system and they've each bought individual licenses from the same vendor. They use the same system. So all of their students are managed through the same student record system. Now, obviously, if you think about it, 41 institutions, they're going to offer different courses. They're going to have different routes. They're going to have different programs, different modules, etc. And so even just trying to think about the data map that they must have behind that to make that work is complex. But actually, within any organisation, with any institution, you start with your institutional structure within a student record system. You start with, we set up as faculties, we set up as schools, we set up as colleges. That's your first level. Then you've got all of your programmes, then you've got your courses in modules, etc. So all we're doing to be able to share a student record system is add a layer above that, which goes, which institution are you? The first question you ask, Susanna Marsden, you're a student here, and it says, I am with institution A, Aaron Tyler's institution B. So immediately we've just separated, and then we've gone into our own model of study. And so it's much the same. Does that mean that we, as the universities in Sweden, are saving on expense? They've got to be. They're not all individual. Some people still use on-prem student record systems. They're not individually hosting systems. They've got shared upgrades. They've got shared admin support. They've got shared system administration. I mean, not necessarily the administration of the record, but system administration, all the patches they do collaboratively. And it also means that all the universities are on the same sort of cycle of activity. So if the Swedish government wants to say you're going to do the equivalent of HISA or LLE, you've all got to do it. They've now got all on the same timelines. It's much easier for that to be organised and coordinated and worked through. So if it can happen for 41 institutions in Sweden, I'm sure it can happen here. I do want to organise a field trip to Sweden just to double check though, so that I can get over there obviously and spend some time exploring the country whilst I'm there. But it's proof, and I think it's inevitable that systems at some point are going to be shared. More complex systems over and above the ones that already are shared will be shared across institutions.
Finishing up our conversation today, when I talked with David Umber, Vice-Chancellor at Birmingham City University, in the third episode, he said, "We're here to serve our students first and foremost." And there were similar sentiments from each of the Vice-Chancellors about serving the needs of others. How do you think the sector can be best supported and enabled in that focus on service as we move into, say, the next 5 years?
I think that any organisation that is supporting a HE institution needs to have similar values. If your values are focused on purely shareholder returns, purely returns on investments, purely on what I guess are deemed more traditional commercial measures of success, I think you're going to miss the point. And if you miss the point of service and how important that is for the institutions to serve their students, their partners, their communities, as I mentioned right at the start, all four of the Vice-Chancellors spoke about that. Their identity is behind being able to serve. Universities don't consume. Universities create and deliver and serve others. And I think certainly for us at Pact Solutions, I mean, our purpose is to enable universities to do what they already do, but better, is to enable them to realise their full digital capabilities so they can serve. And for us, that is a service to the institution. We are here to serve that. We're not here to come to try and take from the universities. Obviously, we're a commercial organisation, and we're going to have profit elements to things that we do, as any organisation, the commercial organisation does. But that will be of a result of us serving those institutions. If we think that we could just pitch up and take and not give back and not leave an institution better than it was before we joined, then we're not going to be successful. And ultimately, we wouldn't be here. I mean, one of the questions you asked, Susanna, was what kept me in HE, and it's that extra fulfillment that you get of seeing the impact that you've made. So while we may not be directly working with students and communities now of the universities, we are indirectly. We're working for those universities, serving them so that they can serve their customers, their students. So we're still getting that feedback. We're still getting that result. We still know that we're having an impact on the lives of thousands of students, and that's incredibly rewarding. Been working obviously for a long time, and honestly, it's been the most fulfilling few years of my life working in HE, and long may it continue. And I think that anyone who wants to work in HE needs to understand that we're here to serve.
Aaron, it's been a real pleasure talking with you today. Thank you for Pact Solutions' sponsorship of the mini-series, and thank you very much for your time in this episode.
No problem at all. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. Thank you.
Job Shadowing HE is proudly supported by the Association of Higher Education Professionals as a valuable source of professional insight. It was presented by Susanna Marsden, and you can find out more about her consultancy work at susannamarsden.co.uk. Audio production and music was by me, Rodri Marsden. Find out more about this podcast and hear previous episodes at jobshadowinghe.com.